Two murder investigations from the case files of Lieutenant Joe Kenda. A savage knife attack leaves a middle-aged mother clinging to life.
This is an incredibly violent crime.
Kenda's on the hunt for a suspect with a twisted mind.
There were some things that just didn't make sense.
People behave in certain ways for a reason.
Police, open up!
Then,
Oh my God.
the discovery of a hidden confession opens the door to an age-old murder mystery.
1893.
Yeah, how about fell off my chair?
Murder is murder. There's no statute of limitations, even from the Old West.
I want you to leave now.
This isn't self-defense. You are lying pure and simple. This country has always been armed to the teeth, and it certainly was in the Old West. Death, murder, assault was a very common thing. No one was surprised by it. People expected it. There's one thing.
This was in a nice residential neighborhood, basically in the northeast part of Colorado Springs. Sheila Scott was in her kitchen baking cookies. She hears a knock.
Sheila, where's your phone?
And she finds that it's her neighbor, Jerry Denton.
Jerry, what happened?
Your phone, Sheila, I need it.
Jerry, you're back.
She's freaked that on his back there's blood.
Yeah, I need an ambulance. Look, my wife's been stabbed. I think she's dying.
Across town, Sergeant Joe Kenda is enjoying lunch from one of his favorite local food joints.
There was a hamburger stand in Colorado Springs that's now unfortunately out of business that made giant, oversized hamburgers. They were wonderful.
How's the dog? The kids love him. He's a pain in my ass. Keep pissing on the carpet.
Still isn't the house broken yet?
Not yet, man. I'm trying my best. He won't listen to nothing I say.
I should try talking a little nicer to him.
Now you sound like my wife.
Dispatch to 441.
Go 4-1.
There's a call comes over the radio, an attempted murder.
10-4, I'm on the way.
I guess duty calls. You gotta go.
When you receive a call in my line of work, just eat it or leave it and go do your job.
Good luck with the dog.
Yeah.
Hey, Skip.
Hey, Sergeant.
So what have we got?
2 victims, married couple, both suffered stab wounds.
I was one of the first detectives to arrive at the scene, and all we knew is that Jerry Denton, the husband, had a stab wound in his back, and his wife, Pat Denton, had actually been stabbed in the neck.
We took them both to the hospital. Jerry isn't in too bad shape, but word on his wife is she's unlikely to survive.
Any kids?
Yeah, they got 2, but they're both at school.
Jerry's a contractor for a development company, and Pat is a stay-at-home mom. And together, they have a nice little family.
So Jerry told the comm center that it was an intruder, but I'm not so sure we should rule him out just yet.
All right. Let's take a look inside.
The most common call that the police respond to is a domestic disturbance, where husbands and wives get into violent confrontations.
Was this something that happened between the two of them, or were there any other suspects?
This is where EMS found the body.
There's a large pool of blood in the kitchen, followed by a blood trail. It's apparent that she staggers and collapses on the floor and is bleeding profusely from a neck wound. Detective Arms tells me that the house phone line had been cut, which explains why the 911 call was made from a neighbor's house.
What have we got in here?
In the house, there was a pile of clothes on the floor. That seemed out of place for this crime scene.
Who do you think they belong to? Could be a number of people.
Is it the husband's clothes? Is it somebody else's? Somebody got undressed in here. Why would they do that?
I got an idea. Where's the bedroom at? Right this way.
So we went up to the master bedroom,
I'll grab one of those.
found the husband's shoes, and compared the shoes to these.
The different sizes.
That led us to believe that they were not Jerry's clothes.
What if the missus has a boyfriend? Dad comes home, finds this undressed person in his house, and he assumes he's not a nudist who came in to use the phone, and the knife comes out.
Let's go see what else we got.
We go back downstairs. We go looking around. We find the patio door has been broken.
Sergeant, here, check this out. Coins.
The physical evidence indicates this is a burglary. It's somebody who's doing a crime in this house, not a boyfriend of the wife, and not the husband.
So Pat and Jerry discover a burglar in the kitchen. He freaks and grabs a knife. Whoever he is shouldn't be too hard to find. If those are the suspect's clothes on the floor in there, we got a guy running around in his underwear. Let's go.
Now, why does he get undressed? Well, that's the $64 question. People behave in certain ways for a reason. We just don't know what it is.
Got a dispatch.
Kenda and I broadcast out to the officers in the immediate vicinity of the crime scene, warning them to be on the lookout for someone who is considered dangerous, would have only been wearing underwear and socks.
As the search commences, Kenda and Arms hope victim Jerry Denton might be able to bring some clarity to the investigation.
How's it going in here? Jerry, I'm Sergeant Kenda. You okay to talk?
Yeah, sure.
Do you know who did this to you and your wife?
Yes and no.
What do you mean?
There's this teen with brown hair. I don't know his name, but I think he lives on our street.
So now the question becomes simple. Which kid and in which house? This particular case involves a married couple who become victims of an incredibly violent crime. The husband knows that the perpetrator lives in the neighborhood.
Why don't you just start from the beginning?
Okay, well, it all started late this morning when I was at work. Yeah.
Something happened, but don't worry. April and I are fine.
What do you mean? What happened?
Pat tells him that there's a neighbor kid that came to the house this morning at 10 o'clock, and she recognized him, so she let him in.
Pat said he was acting strangely, so she sent April to her room. And then she said he pulled out a knife and he was gonna rape her.
But she's able to talk him out of doing this, and is able to basically have him eventually leave the house without engaging in any type of sexual assault.
And obviously, I'm freaking out as she's telling me all this. Are you at the police station now?
No, I'm at home.
What?
I don't think we need to call cops, sweetheart.
Honey, this is serious. You could be in danger. But why don't you drive over to my office? You can spend the rest of the day here.
Okay, well, I have to take April to kindergarten anyway, so I will see you in a little bit.
And that's when you called the police to tell them what happened?
No, we didn't call you guys that time. Pat wouldn't let me.
Why not exactly?
One of the ways that Pat got the perpetrator out of the house was to promise not to call the police if he didn't harm her.
I should have put my foot down and called, but we didn't. And then when we got home, that's when it happened.
Jerry tells us that he and Pat got home in separate cars, but essentially at the same time. Pat walks into the house, and Jerry initially goes to check the mail. He sees that Pat's been stabbed in the neck
No. You gotta let go.
He said he didn't know what to do. He took the knife out and tried to put a towel around her neck.
Look at me. You're okay. Look at me. It's okay. Look at me. It's okay. It's fine. Stay away from me.
And that's when he got attacked from behind.
See, I saw him just standing there. This brown-haired teen. He was going crazy and stuff.
Stay the away from me, man. You kill me, I'll kill you. I swear.
And then he ran out of the house. Did you see where he went? No, but I'm guessing he went home because he was just in his underwear and socks. Maybe Pat might know in house. I don't know.
Okay, Jerry. Thank you. Hope you get better soon.
After learning more about his suspect, Kenda makes necessary preparations.
So I notified the tactical unit commander that we may have a situation here where we're going to have to take a kid out of a house. I don't know yet. So they get their team assembled to stand by in the event that we determine location and identity.
In the meantime, detectives hope to gather more information from Pat Denton herself. But there's one problem.
Pat couldn't talk. She'd had surgery to repair her throat.
I know you're not supposed to talk.
So we explain who we are and what we're doing. And I said, I know you're not supposed to speak to me, but can you write?
Can you tell us the name of the person that did this to you?
She writes David.
You know his last name? How about where he lives?
Mrs. Denton writes directly across the street, one house to the left.
Hang in there. You're gonna be okay.
And then she wrote something else. I looked at it and it said, why me?
I don't know why you, but we're gonna find the person that did this.
So I said, my dear, I know we will find him and we will punish him for what he has done.
Kenda dispatch.
Dispatch to Kenda.
With a name and address for their suspect,
10-4.
I'll be right over.
Kenda deploys the tactical team waiting on standby.
This is called a high-risk arrest. You're dealing with someone who exhibits violence, who announces he's insane. It is very dangerous.
Police, open up!
What?
David, where's David?
My son, he's in his bedroom.
All right, step outside, ma'am.
Well, what is this? David didn't do anything.
Ma'am, he's wanted in connection with an attempted murder that occurred this morning.
That's impossible. He's been with me all day. He's been sleeping.
Stay with her.
Police department.
He's on the bed. Get out of the bed right now. Get out of the bed. Hands on your head. Turn around to the bed. Hands behind your back.
What's going on? I didn't do anything.
Yeah, where were you between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m.?
I've been sleeping.
Let's clear this up.
The shoes we found in that house, the crime scene, are a size 10. David's are a size 7.
Go down, cuff him. Sorry for the intrusion, David. Lynn, can you bring in Miss Andrews?
So at that point, we're kind of confused because we have David, but David's not our guy.
So much for the David lead. Apologies, Miss Andrews.
Wait. Are you guys looking for the other David?
The other David?
My friend David, he's been staying with us for a while. But he's got some problems, I guess you could say.
Well, that would be the David that I'm looking for because he has a lot of problems. and he's about to have enough. The tactical unit has made entry into the suspect residence.
Are you guys looking for the other David?
We found a kid named David, and he's the wrong David. So I speak to Mom, and the mother says that David Dodson has come to live with them.
He's a 17-year-old kid. He does fit the description.
I thought he seemed like a good kid. He's pretty quiet.
So why was he staying here?
Well, he moved to the Springs from Oklahoma City a couple months ago, but things weren't working out at home.
The mother explains that David Dodson, he's kind of a lost soul. She felt sorry for him, and she allowed him to move in.
Have you seen David at all since this morning? I think he might have returned to get some clothes.
No, he hasn't been back.
Where is he now? This kid is naked, he's on foot. He needs to find clothing, and he needs to find a way out because he assumes, quite correctly, that the police are on his heels.
Excuse me, Sergeant. Got a report of a stolen car, 2 blocks from the crime scene.
Just like that. Another lead. Is this connected? It's just too close not to be.
Let's go. Excuse me.
Detectives head out to follow up on the potential lead of the stolen car.
I had it parked right there.
Were the keys in there?
Well, no, but I do leave a spare under my bumper.
Back in the days, we all had those little stick-on hide-a-key things.
Was there anything of value in the car?
Not really, just some cash. And my boyfriend left some clothes in there.
Clothes.
This kid gets incredibly lucky. He finds a truck that happens to have jeans, a shirt, and some sneakers. How does that happen?
So now our man has clothes, he's got money, and he's got transport. Now, where does a fugitive run to? Predictable places.
All right, well, thank you.
They go find their mama, their girlfriend, or their money.
Dedicated to dispatch.
So I'm thinking now that maybe he's going back to Oklahoma.
I need a bolo put out.
We put out an alert to all agencies in Oklahoma. We're looking for this stolen car that may contain a male David Dodson. We describe him.
Colorado Springs authorities keep up the search for their fugitive. But they turn up nothing. However, 2 days later, over 300 miles away in Oklahoma.
It looks like it, doesn't it?
It does.
5-4 dispatch. We got a matching vehicle, that Polo. Tag 870 Fox Ocean. Wolf. Hey, young man, what's your name?
Officers approached him.
David Dodson.
And he essentially blurted right out.
Stabbed 2 people in Colorado.
Go ahead and turn around for me.
Great. Simple enough.
Put your hand behind
Time to put handcuffs on you. We extradite him from Oklahoma to Colorado to face charges.
In addition to confessing to the crime, David Dodson makes a shocking claim.
He indicated that he had taken some LSD that morning and also had been drinking. And so he was in sort of a hazy state of mind, if you will, when this whole thing happened.
Detectives still have many questions, but luckily, there is someone who lived to tell the tale.
Pat Denton's recovering from her injuries, able to speak. She was going to be fine.
Did you know David Dodson prior to this?
I mean, I saw him around the neighborhood. That was about it. Good morning. I barely said 2 words to him. And then that morning, he shows up at the house. Hi.
Hi, I'm David from across the street. I was wondering if I could ask for a favor.
Oh, well, sure. What can I do for you?
This young man asked her for a cup of sugar.
How much do you need? April, why don't you go and play in your room for me, okay? Thank you.
Even though April was little, She saw him coming in, and she could tell her mom was uncomfortable. Something was off.
Take your clothes off.
What?
Take your clothes off.
What? I'm sorry. Shoot.
I started talking. I made up a story.
No, you don't want to do that, David. I'm dying, David.
I have AIDS.
Yeah.
That was really thinking on her feet, and she stuck with it.
Is everything okay?
Not really.
Well, why don't we sit down and talk about it? Would you like some coffee? Or, yeah? Okay. Yeah.
She eventually gets him to calm down.
If David had in fact taken LSD, it could explain his impressionable behavior.
Sometimes I feel like I'm dying, you know?
Yeah.
And nobody cares?
Within minutes, he was opening his heart to Pat.
Well, they should care.
She could tell he was a mess and genuinely saw this as an opportunity to get a fellow human being on the right path in life. That's just who she was.
You're not gonna call the cops, are you?
No, I promise. I'm not going to call the cops. David, if you'll excuse me, I really need to get my daughter to kindergarten.
She was very, very fortunate that she was able to talk him out of it.
Kenda believes that during the first encounter, David noticed the jars filled with coins.
He thinks about that as the day wears on, and he's still suffering from the effects of the LSD, but he decides now it's time to burglarize their house. When he sees Mrs. Denton come home, he then changes his mind. He decides to carry out what he was going to do before. He cuts the phone line, and he strips his clothes off. It doesn't make any sense that he does that, but that's what he does.
As Pat went to scream, he lunged at her and stabbed where the noise was coming from, which is essentially why he got her in the throat. After David stabs Pat, Jerry comes in the house to try to help his wife. And it's at that point when Jerry's focused on his wife that David stabs Jerry in the back.
Stay away from me! If you kill me, I'll kill you, I swear to God.
Well, you're lucky to be alive.
The surgeon said the blade missed her carotid artery by 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 of an inch is nothing. In her case, it meant her life.
She lived. So did Jerry. That's what really matters. They lived.
David Dodson pleads guilty and is sentenced to 16 years for attempted murder and 14 years for assault in the first degree.
People are dangerous. When you see something, you tell someone. You don't rely on your word. Oh, please. To who? A criminal? Call the police. Call the police.
Just 10 miles south of Colorado Springs, in the town of Fountain, Jim Eggleston has his hands full with his new home.
When we purchased the home, we knew we would have to do a lot of renovation because it was a very old home. We had to strip the molding from the windows so I could refinish them.
Here you go, honey.
I was trying to be very easy pulling all the molding off and then handing it to my daughter.
Hey, Dad, there's something kind of weird on here. It looks like handwriting.
Let me see. Yeah, you're right.
It was in pencil. It was hard to read at first because it was a different penmanship, you know, an old-time penmanship.
I, John W. Spicer, of the city of Fountain, something. Oh, my God.
When I saw the word murder, I said, holy, this is a murder confession.
The next morning, at the El Paso County District Attorney's Office, investigator Larry Martin is catching up on some paperwork.
Hey, Larry.
Oh, hey, Chief, how you doing?
Well, we've got something. I was hoping you could take a look at it. It was on the back of a piece of molding in an old house in Fountain.
My chief said that he'd gotten a call from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation advising that they had in their possession a possible murder confession, so they contacted the district attorney's office to see if we would be willing to open an investigation.
That's mostly obscured by all this paint and stuff.
The lab at CBI is working on cleaning it up without removing the writing. It's in pencil.
Upon examining this, I noticed right away that some particular words jumped out at me. I did kill and willfully murder.
Signed John Spicer. And there's this.
1893?
Yep.
Wow.
As a member of a modern police force, you don't get an opportunity to open a window into the past very often. In 1986, we ran across something extremely unusual, and it was a window into 100 years before that day.
Martin's first step will be determining whether this is a bona fide confession to an 1893 murder or a hoax.
Larry Martin goes to the Pioneer Museum to see what records they had on when the house was built.
The Pioneers Museum houses records from Colorado Springs and El Paso County, and it's our largest local depository of historical information in the area.
Here's the deed to the property that you asked about.
The house was built in 1899. It's one of the first two-story homes built in the area, and it was a private residence.
It was owned by the Perkins family, and the builder was a John Spicer.
It's the guy who wrote the confession.
Oh. So now it's starting to make sense. He built the house in 1899.
John Spicer was a carpenter. Many families around the area hired him to help build their homes.
Now, this was 6 years after the purported murder took place. This is when he could have decided to write that confession.
Someone once said guilt is a terrible thing, and it is. Release of that burden becomes paramount as people age.
John Spicer nailed it to a wall, hoping that in some time in the very far future, maybe somebody would find it. Now I'm thinking, this is no hoax. I've got a case that dates back 100 years, and where am I going to find the information I need?
One possibility is Colorado Springs Police. Could they have a century-old case file on this murder?
Larry, hey, Joe, take a look at this.
So I went to Joe, and once I laid it out to him, his eyes bugged out. Yeah, he was very interested in this.
Wow.
This was an opportunity to look at things that I've always been interested in. History, one of my passions, and the Old West.
So how can I help? I think you can go through the police records and see if there's anything on this murder on the file. I don't have to. They don't exist. CSPD wasn't around in 1893.
The actual municipal police department wasn't formed until 1901. Before that time, there were deputy marshals, and they were the law, and they dispensed justice on the spot in most cases.
So no police. The marshals didn't do much investigating back then. I say your best bet's the library. Yeah, that was my next step. Give it a shot. Listen, I know it's your case. If you need any help, let me know. I'd love to help out. Yeah, I will. Thanks, Joe.
So I was able to go to the Penrose Public Library and do some research on their old newspaper articles. In my research, though, I came across an article from the late 1950s where it mentioned a lady who was helping a family from Illinois find headstones for burial sites for some of the Locke and Spicer families.
Marguerite Buckley.
Is that a lead that I can maybe get more information on who John Spicer was?
Later that afternoon, Martin finds a phone number in the directory and gives it a try.
Hi, I'm looking for a Marguerite Buckley.
This is she.
Hi, Marguerite. This is Detective Larry Martin. I'm doing a little bit of research on a man named John Spicer, and I was wondering if you knew anything about him.
Well, I do. John Spicer was my father.
I about fell off my chair. What? I got the daughter to the confessed killer?
All right, thank you so much, Ernie. All right, bye.
I called Joe and I said, let's go.
At her home, 89-year-old Marguerite Spicer Buckley happily shares stories of her father.
My dad had a lot of different jobs when I was growing up.
Marguerite explained he was sort of a general laborer. He worked in a railroad. He was a carpenter. He'd done what he had to do to survive and feed his family.
So he was a good father?
Well, not exactly. When he wasn't working, he was drinking somewhere.
She was very blunt that her dad was an ugly drunk. He was very mean. And when he started drinking, she would actually pour his whiskey for him and give him a lot of whiskey because she wanted him to pass out very quickly.
Get it, girl!
Sorry, Pop.
I ought to teach you a lesson for being so careless. Get him outside before I change my mind.
Gambling, he got into that too.
In the 1880s, 1890s, gambling went hand in hand with drinking. That was their entertainment.
So I finally told her, I got to be honest with you. The reason I'm doing a history on him is he may have committed a murder.
We found what we believe to be a confession written by your father.
Her demeanor changed instantly.
If you don't mind, I want you to leave now. I'm tired. I don't think that I could be of any more use to you.
Thank you, man.
When you interview people as much as us, you know when you touch a nerve. You've found what is probably a dark family secret that they really don't want you to know. We need to get to the bottom. Colorado Bureau of Investigation has been working on deciphering a confession to an 1893 murder. We believe that John Spicer killed someone, and we also believe that his daughter, Marguerite, knows something about it.
This is Investigator Martin.
I eventually get a telephone call from Agent Mooney of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation.
I've been working on this piece of wood you brought me.
He said he was able to decipher the name of the victim, John Sebastian.
We're still trying to clean up the rest of the confession.
Hey, this is great.
This is critical information, which we didn't have before. So now we have to look at this John Sebastian.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Who is he?
Martin and Kenda return to the Pioneers Museum to look through old city directories for traces of their victim.
And bang, 1893, we find the name John J. Sebastian. Lived in Colorado Springs, worked for the railroad.
The last time his name appears in the city directory is 1893. In the 1894 edition and beyond, no John Sebastian. Did he dry up and blow away, or did John Spicer kill him?
Once we learn about John Sebastian, it's clear we need to talk to Marguerite again to find out, did she know the Sebastian family? So Joe and I went down. We actually brought her some flowers, kind of a peace offering.
I know we sort of ended on a bad note.
Please, just sit down. I'm so glad you came back. It's time the truth came out.
I knew then, okay, here it comes.
The story you're about to hear from me was told me by my mother, and it was told her by my father, John Spicer.
John Spicer told his wife it'd been hard to break some wild horses. And he was building a fence to contain these horses.
he heard a man sneaking up on him.
Give me your money. I'll cut you. Give me your money. Come on. What you got?
Spicer was forced to defend himself.
Marguerite tells me that her father struck this man in the head, and it killed him. Marguerite said her dad searched through the man's pockets to try to find out who this person was, but there was no identification on him whatsoever.
He went and told the marshal who came out to investigate, and he determined that he had killed the man in self-defense.
The man who died, could his name have been John Sebastian?
No, I don't recognize the name. But the marshal always said that he probably was a drifter.
At this point, I'm thinking, there's got to be something else.
Thank you so much. Pleasure. Why would Spicer tell his family he didn't know the guy's name, but then definitely write John Sebastian on the confession? Maybe because he didn't want to tell his family the whole story. Maybe John Spicer isn't the hero he claimed to be.
I think Spicer's lying, pure and simple. You didn't talk to anybody, except to your wife. And when you talked to her, you lied to her.
Later that day, a call from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation sheds some more light on Kenda's theory.
Finally able to make out most of the confession. Spicer pretty much lays out everything. Apparently he hits this guy John Sebastian with a club to rob him for $5,000 worth of cash and jewelry.
This isn't self-defense. Spicer killed the guy for a reason.
That's a lot of money in 1893. In today's monetary value, that would be around $130,000 probably. There is no way John Sebastian could have earned that kind of money working for the railroad.
There are only two ways you can have that kind of money: through being a gold miner and having a successful claim in the mountains, or through gambling. And his daughter Marguerite tells us that he was a gambler. And I believe that's the common thread between John Spicer and Sebastian.
Put your money in, Sebastian.
John Spicer and John Sebastian met, perhaps through the railroad where they worked. They gambled. They drank.
Bitch.
On this particular day, John Sebastian was the big winner. He wiped everybody out. Not only their money, but their rings, their watches, and any jewelry they may have had on them.
Hand it over, Spicer.
John Spicer knew the wife was not going to be happy. He had squandered away all of his money.
Well, boys, it's been fun.
He needed to somehow get that money back.
He cheated.
It's at this point, John Spicer himself lays out what happened next.
To whomever may happen to find this confession, on or about the first day of March, 1993, I, John W. Spicer, did kill and willfully murder with a club one John J. Sebastian. For his money and jewelry to the value of $5,000. The hope that when I'm gone, this confession may be found and at last clear up the darkest mystery that ever embraced one in human murder. In prayer for the partial salvation of my soul.
John Spicer left John Sebastian there to die, and probably wild animals would have got to it. The remains would never have been found.
With no one alive to arrest, Martin files a report with the district attorney's office, officially closing the case.
Larry Martin decided to donate the molding to the Fountain Valley Historical Society as a memory of that event.
The last time anyone saw Ellie Thompson, she was standing outside her best friend's house, her dark eyes sparkling under the glow of the street lamp. It was the kind of evening you wouldn't think twice about. Just another night in the sleepy town of Pinewood, nestled between the rolling hills of a quiet valley. Ellie had promised her mother she'd be home by 10 p.m. She was 16, full of life and ambition, the kind of girl whose laughter echoed in every corner of the small town. And yet, when Tenpu came and went, no one thought much of it. Ellie had always been a free spirit, sometimes running a few minutes late, but that night, those few minutes turned into hours, and those hours into a nightmare. Ellie never came home. At first, the town was in denial. No one truly believed she was gone. It didn't make sense. Pinewood wasn't the kind of place where anything truly awful happened. The police, the community, even Ellie's own family assumed it was just a misunderstanding, maybe an impromptu sleepover at a friend's house, or perhaps Ellie had run off to clear her head. She had been growing distant lately. But the next morning, when Ellie's mother, Helen, woke up to an empty house, the realization hit hard. This was no ordinary disappearance. Something was terribly wrong. The search for Ellie began immediately. The town rallied together. Neighbors joined in the effort, scouring the streets, knocking on doors and spreading the word. Flyers with Ellie's picture were pinned to every bulletin board, and the local news picked up the story. The town buzzed with rumors, theories, and speculation. Some thought she had run away. Others feared she had been abducted. But no one had any concrete answers. Helen was beside herself. She clung to the hope that her daughter would walk through the door any minute, but the hours stretched into days, and the days stretched into weeks. Nothing. No trace of Ellie. No phone calls. No texts. No clues. Her friends were interviewed. They all insisted that she had been perfectly fine the last time they saw her. Ellie had made plans with them for the weekend. She had been excited to hang out. There were no signs of struggle at her friend's house, no indication that she had ever left. But when the police expanded the search, even scouring nearby woods and fields, it became clear. Ellie was gone. With each passing day, the town grew darker. Ellie's face stared back at the community from every corner, her smiling photo on missing posters in grocery stores, on billboards, on the front pages of the local paper. Her face was everywhere. Yet there was no progress in the investigation. No suspects, no leads, just the deafening silence of a missing girl whose story was slowly fading from the minds of those who had once cared. Time went on. The case was officially declared a cold case after a few months. The police had done everything they could, or so it seemed. The interviews, the searches, the endless questions. Yet all they had was a long list of names and faces, none of which led anywhere. Ellie's mother was devastated. But as weeks turned into months and months turned into years, Helen found herself standing alone. The calls from the detectives grew less frequent. The newspaper articles faded into history. The once active search parties were disbanded. The town had moved on, but Helen never stopped. She couldn't. Her daughter's disappearance had become a wound that refused to heal, one that gnawed at her from within. Ellie was her world, and without her, it felt like a part of her had been ripped away. She spent the next decade obsessively digging into every lead, no matter how small. The police had given up. Her husband, Greg, had stopped asking questions. Her friends had stopped offering condolences. But Helen could never let go. She would spend hours on the phone with anyone who might know something, following up on old tips, chasing down half-baked theories, hoping to catch something that would bring her daughter home. For years the case went cold, gathering dust in a file folder somewhere in the back of a police station. The disappearance of Ellie Thompson was just another tragic, unsolved mystery in a town that no longer cared. The police focused on other cases. The town focused on moving forward. But Ellie's absence lingered in the quiet places, the empty spaces at dinner tables, the silent nights, the long walks she would never take again. It was a shadow, a heavy presence that no one could escape, no matter how many years passed. Then, One late afternoon in the spring of 2023, the phone rang. Helen's hands shook as she picked up the receiver. She didn't recognize the voice on the other end, but the words that came next left her breathless. "We've got something. A lead. A new clue in Ellie's case." It wasn't much. In fact, it was almost nothing at all. A piece of an old file, a note that had been overlooked for years. But it was something. And for the first time in over 20 years, hope flickered. The detective on the line, a young investigator named Sarah Jacobs, explained how her department had recently started looking into old, unsolved cases. They had a new approach now, one that involved a fresh pair of eyes and advanced forensic techniques that were unavailable when Ellie had first disappeared. Jacobs, a no-nonsense detective with a reputation for getting results, had pulled Ellie's case from the archives, determined to find something, anything, that could provide a breakthrough. It had been nearly 3 decades since Ellie Thompson vanished, but something in the investigation had caught Sarah's attention. A name. A name that had been quietly hovering in the background of the case all along. Someone who had been tangentially involved in the early investigation, but whose connection had never been fully explored. It wasn't much, just a few lines in the case file, but Sarah thought it was worth looking into. The name was Thomas Turner. Thomas Turner was a quiet man who lived on the outskirts of Pinewood. He kept to himself, and had always been somewhat of a recluse, working odd jobs and rarely engaging with the community. Back in 1993, he had been interviewed briefly by the police. He was one of the many individuals the authorities had questioned after Ellie's disappearance. At the time, there was nothing to suggest that Turner was involved in any way. He had been cleared, and his name was buried in the list of people who had simply passed through the investigation without making a significant impact. But now, Sarah's instincts told her something was off. Why hadn't anyone ever revisited his case? What had Turner been doing the night Ellie disappeared? Was there more to his story than anyone had realized? The next steps were clear. Sarah and her team would revisit Turner. They would re-interview those who had known him. They would go over every detail, every clue, and every piece of evidence with a fine-tooth comb. And so, the case that had remained cold for so long would finally begin to heat up once again. For Helen, the call was everything. She had spent 20 years living in a world of questions without answers. The thought of Ellie, wherever she was, remained a constant ache in her chest. But now, there was a possibility, just a chance, that after all these years, the truth might finally come to light. And with it, the possibility of justice, of closure, of finding her daughter. Helen didn't know what was coming next, but after all the years of silence, after all the pain, she was ready to face whatever truths would emerge. Sarah Jacobs spent hours in the dimly lit evidence room, sifting through decades-old files, searching for any scrap of information that might shed light on the long-buried mystery of Ellie Thompson's disappearance. The case, though officially cold, had left a cold imprint on the town, a gnawing, unanswered question that no one seemed willing to confront. But now, here she was, determined to push past the cobwebs of time and uncover whatever secrets had been buried. Her fingers brushed over a stack of case files that had been untouched for years. She could almost feel the weight of the silence that had descended over the investigation. Ellie's name, once on the lips of every resident in Pinewood, was now just a ghost in the records. A name that had been relegated to a forgotten file in the back of a drawer. But not for Sarah. No, this case felt different. There was something in the air, a sense that the pieces were finally beginning to align. Something told her that the truth about Ellie Thompson was closer than anyone had dared hope. The name that had piqued Sarah's interest, Thomas Turner, kept popping up. His name had appeared in witness statements, police interviews, and old neighborhood gossip, but there had never been a real focus on him. Turner had always been the quiet guy on the outskirts of town, someone who kept to himself and rarely interacted with anyone outside his small circle. And yet, as Sarah dug deeper, she began to see a pattern, one that had been there all along, overlooked by those who had worked on the case before her. Turner had been a mystery, a loner. But there was something about his isolation that didn't sit right with Sarah. His behavior had been odd, even back then. He'd had a series of run-ins with law enforcement, none of them serious enough to warrant arrest, but enough to raise eyebrows. And when Sarah started looking into his whereabouts on the night Ellie vanished, things began to take a dark turn. Thomas Turner's alibi for the night of Ellie's disappearance had always seemed shaky. He'd claimed to be at home, alone, watching TV. No one had questioned him much, not when there were so many other potential suspects to investigate. The initial police report had noted that Turner's name had come up in relation to Ellie's disappearance, but no one had pursued it further. Why would they? There was nothing to suggest that he was involved, nothing at least that could be definitively proven. But in the world of cold cases, sometimes it's the things left unsaid, the tiny fragments of information left scattered in the wind, that turn out to be the most important. Sarah decided to dig into Turner's past, pulling up any records she could find. What she uncovered was enough to send a chill down her spine. Turner had been living in Pinewood for years, but he hadn't always been a recluse. There were records of him once being a regular at a local bar, drinking with friends, socializing with the townspeople. But that had changed over time. Turner had begun to withdraw from society, to avoid contact with everyone. His behavior had grown increasingly erratic. It was during this period of isolation that Ellie had gone missing. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but there was one thing Sarah needed to know. Was Turner capable of something as horrific as kidnapping and murder? Could this quiet, reclusive man, who had always stayed under the radar, really be the key to Ellie's disappearance? The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Sarah found an old interview transcript in Ellie's case file, one that had been conducted just days after she disappeared. It was an interview with a local man named Jerry Hall, a longtime friend of Turner's. At the time, Jerry had been adamant that Turner had nothing to do with Ellie's disappearance. He had vouched for Turner's character, claiming that Turner was harmless and had no reason to harm anyone, especially a young girl like Ellie. But reading between the lines of the interview, Sarah noticed something strange in Jerry's tone. His words were cautious, almost too rehearsed. It was as if he were trying too hard to convince the interviewer of Turner's innocence. The subtle hints of discomfort in his voice made Sarah pause. There was something in Jerry's reaction that didn't quite add up. So Sarah did something no one else had thought to do. She went back to Jerry Hall. She re-interviewed him. The interview was short, but this time Jerry's demeanor was different. He was uneasy, almost apologetic. He spoke slowly, carefully choosing his words. And then, out of nowhere, Jerry made a confession. He admitted that Turner had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to Ellie's disappearance. According to Jerry, Turner had been obsessed with Ellie, although he never went into detail. He mentioned how Turner had asked him about Ellie multiple times, asking if she had been seeing anyone, if she was dating. Jerry had dismissed it as odd, but he didn't think much of it at the time. But when Ellie disappeared, Jerry began to realize that Turner's fixation on her was more than just casual curiosity. It was darker, more obsessive. "I didn't think anything of it back then," Jerry told Sarah, his voice low and strained. "But now, looking back, I think he knew something. I think he was watching her. I think he—" Jerry trailed off, unable to finish his sentence. Sarah pushed him, urging him to elaborate, but Jerry remained silent for a moment, his eyes darting nervously. It was clear that he was afraid of what he was saying, but Sarah could see the fear in his eyes. Whatever he knew, whatever Turner had done, was too much for him to carry alone. The weight of his silence had haunted him all these years. "I don't know for sure," Jerry whispered. "But I think I think he had something to do with it. I think he was obsessed. and I think he followed her that night. Those words struck Sarah like a bolt of lightning. Suddenly, the entire investigation shifted. Turner's obsession with Ellie, which had been dismissed as insignificant, was now the key to understanding what had really happened on that fateful night. Sarah immediately began to dig deeper into Turner's life, seeking any connections, any evidence that might prove his involvement. She reached out to former co-workers, acquaintances, and neighbors. She uncovered a troubling pattern. Turner had spent the night Ellie disappeared in the woods at the edge of town, an area he had never frequented before. His truck had been seen there, parked in a secluded spot just a few miles from Ellie's house. As Sarah pieced together the evidence, the mystery deepened. What had Turner been doing out there, in the woods, at the exact time Ellie vanished? Was it a coincidence that he had been so close to the scene of the crime? Sarah knew that she was getting closer, but there was one more thing she needed. Turner's property. She needed to search his house, his land. She needed to find something, anything, that could link him to Ellie's disappearance. But there was a problem. Turner had always been a model citizen. He hadn't been arrested for anything serious. His property was off-limits unless they had enough to obtain a warrant. But then, in a moment of serendipity, an old tip resurfaced. A neighbor had noticed something strange years ago. Turner had been digging in his backyard during the week that Ellie disappeared. The neighbor had always thought it was odd, but never mentioned it to the police. Now, Sarah had a new lead. Turner's yard had never been searched. The pieces were falling into place, one after another. The question wasn't whether Turner was involved in Ellie's disappearance. It was whether they could prove it. And so, with new determination, Sarah Jacobs set her sights on Turner's home. The cold case was finally starting to crack, and Sarah was on the brink of uncovering the truth that had been buried for over 2 decades. But she had no idea how deep the darkness really went. As she prepared for the next step in her investigation, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling that what they were about to uncover might be more horrific than anything they could have ever imagined. The first time Sarah Jacobs stepped onto Thomas Turner's property, she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of foreboding that seemed to hang in the air. The wind rustled through the tall, unkempt grass surrounding his dilapidated farmhouse, a silent witness to the years of neglect that had crept into the place. Turner had always been an enigma, someone who preferred to remain invisible, tucked away on the edge of Pinewood, where few ventured. But today, Sarah was determined to change that. The property that had once seemed like just another isolated corner of town was now the epicenter of a long-buried mystery. She glanced at her team, who were just as tense as she was, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. There was an eerie stillness here, an unsettling quiet that only deepened as they approached the house. The smell of mildew and rotting wood hung heavy in the air. The old farmhouse had once been a symbol of rural charm, but now it seemed like a forgotten relic, a place lost in time. As Sarah and her team moved cautiously through the overgrown yard, her mind raced with the implications of what they might find. She had been digging through Turner's history, piecing together his past, and she knew that his odd behavior around Ellie, his strange obsession, was not the only thing that had raised alarm bells. There were hints of something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface, something that had never been fully addressed, never fully understood. The neighbor's tip about Turner digging in his backyard during the time of Ellie's disappearance was the spark that reignited the investigation. The neighbor had described seeing Turner out back, alone, digging with what appeared to be a sense of urgency. At the time, no one thought to investigate it further. But now, Sarah knew that it was a critical piece of the puzzle. When Sarah reached the backyard, the scene before her was unsettling. The ground was torn up, patches of earth disturbed in a way that suggested a hurried, haphazard effort. Someone had been digging here, but what had they been looking for? What had they buried? Her team began to spread out, methodically examining the yard for any signs of recent activity. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she focused on the area where the neighbor had described seeing Turner. The soil had been recently disturbed, but there was something else. A faint, acrid smell that seemed to linger in the air. It was the kind of smell that was hard to place, but once recognized, impossible to forget. It was the smell of decay. Something dead. They began to dig. The first few inches of soil turned up nothing. But as the team worked their way deeper, Sarah's hands trembled with anticipation. She had been a detective for years, but this felt different. This wasn't just another case. This was personal. Ellie Thompson's face was still fresh in her mind, that bright smile frozen in time. Her disappearance had haunted this town for nearly 3 decades, and now the pieces were starting to fall into place. Then suddenly, the shovel hit something solid. There was a muffled thud that echoed through the silent air. The team froze, exchanging tense glances. Sarah knelt beside the hole, her heart racing. She couldn't afford to make any assumptions yet, but the moment she looked down, she knew. They had found something. Slowly, carefully, they removed the dirt around the object. It was a metal box, rusted and weathered by time. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she glanced up at her team. No one spoke. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the whole world was holding its breath. With the help of her team, Sarah pried open the box. Inside, there were a series of items, each one sending a ripple of unease through her. The first thing she saw was a pile of old, yellowed photographs. They were nothing like the photos Sarah had seen in the case file. These were personal photos. Photos of young girls, some of them familiar, others not. And there, unmistakable among the pile, was a photograph of Ellie Thompson. It was a picture of her taken just a few weeks before her disappearance. Ellie was smiling, her eyes bright and full of life, standing with her friends at a local park. It was the last known photo of her. But why was it here, buried in Turner's backyard? Sarah's stomach twisted. The photograph alone wasn't enough. There had to be more. And there was. Beneath the photos there were scraps of old newspaper clippings, each one about missing persons, local tragedies, and strange disappearances. Some were from years before Ellie's case, others from after. It was clear that Turner had been following these cases, obsessively collecting them. But what was more disturbing was the way he had annotated some of the articles. Turner had written small notes in the margins of several clippings, names, dates, locations. And one of those notes was on an article about Ellie's disappearance. Written in Turner's distinctive handwriting, it read, "She's mine now." Sarah's hands trembled as she lifted the crumpled piece of paper. The implications were horrifying. Turner had been obsessing over Ellie long before she went missing, and now, it seemed, he had taken her. But there was something else in the box. Something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Hidden beneath the papers, wrapped in a stained cloth, was a small, delicate piece of jewelry. A silver bracelet, engraved with Ellie's initials. This wasn't just some random piece of evidence. This was Ellie's bracelet. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the weight of what they had just uncovered. This wasn't just a collection of creepy memorabilia. It was the evidence they had been searching for. Ellie Thompson had been here, at this house, and now they were holding the last remnants of her life in their hands. Without wasting another moment, Sarah signaled to her team. "We need to secure the scene. This is it. We have the evidence we need." But even as the team began to secure the area and prepare to bring Turner in for questioning, Sarah's mind raced. She needed to know more. What had Turner done to Ellie? How had she ended up here, in his backyard, with his collection of twisted mementos? The next few hours were a blur of activity as Sarah worked with her team to gather everything they could from the property. They documented every item they found in the box, cataloguing the evidence and preparing for what was sure to be a critical interrogation with Turner. But there was still so much they didn't know. They knew Turner had been fixated on Ellie, but what had driven him to do this? Was he acting alone, or was there someone else involved? As Sarah stood at the edge of the yard, staring at the freshly disturbed ground, she felt a sinking sensation in her chest. They had made a breakthrough, yes, but this wasn't over. There were still too many questions, too many loose ends. Ellie's body had never been found, and until it was, they couldn't afford to jump to conclusions. But for the first time in years, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. They were getting closer. The truth was just within reach. The case that had haunted this town for so long was finally starting to unravel, and Sarah Jacobs was determined to bring Ellie's family the answers they deserved. The long, painful years of silence were coming to an end, and with every piece of evidence that emerged from the ground, Sarah knew they were one step closer to bringing closure to this dark, twisted chapter in Pinewood's history. But as she turned toward the farmhouse, a thought gnawed at her. What if Turner wasn't the only monster hiding in this town? What if the true horrors of Ellie's disappearance were even darker than anyone could have ever imagined? The drive back to the station felt like a blur to Sarah Jacobs. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, spinning with 1,000 possibilities as the rain began to fall harder, tapping against the windshield like an ominous drumbeat. The silver bracelet they'd found in Turner's backyard was still sitting in a small evidence bag on the passenger seat. It was heavy with meaning, a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded in Pinewood all those years ago. Sarah couldn't shake the image of Ellie's smile, frozen in the photograph she'd uncovered in Turner's metal box. She had been just a teenager, full of life, full of promise. How could someone like Turner have harbored such a dark obsession with her? And why hadn't anyone noticed sooner? As the rain beat down harder, Sarah's mind went back to the case files, the ones that had gathered dust in the archive for decades, the ones she had painstakingly sifted through in the past few days. For years, Ellie Thompson's disappearance had been chalked up as a mystery with no resolution. But now, they were so close to the truth, so close to finding the answers that had been out of reach for so long. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was an alert from the crime lab. The lab had just finished processing the evidence from Turner's property, including the photographs, the newspaper clippings, and the bracelet. The results were in. Sarah's stomach churned as she read the message. She immediately dialed the lab's number. "Sarah Jacobs," she said as she picked up the call. "Detective Jacobs, we've completed the analysis on the items you brought in from Turner's property. We've found something significant." "Go ahead," Sarah replied, her voice steady but tight with anticipation. "There's blood? Small traces of blood on the bracelet," the lab technician said. "Not enough to get a DNA profile yet, but it's definitely there. The photos, the clippings, they're all consistent with the obsessive behavior we suspected. We've also managed to recover a partial print from one of the photographs, Turner's fingerprints." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the smoking gun they'd been waiting for. The blood on the bracelet confirmed it. Ellie had been there, and Turner had taken her. The partial print was the confirmation they needed. But they weren't done yet. There was still so much left to uncover. "Is there anything else?" Sarah pressed. "We're still working on more tests, but we'll keep you updated. You should come down to the lab when you can," the technician replied before the line went silent. The weight of the new information settled over Sarah like a heavy fog. They had Turner. They had proof that he was involved in Ellie's disappearance. But the bigger question remained. What had happened to Ellie? Where was her body? And how had Turner managed to keep his dark secret hidden for so long? As Sarah arrived at the station, her team was already gathered in the briefing room, anxiously awaiting the next steps. The mood was tense, but hopeful. Hopeful because, for the first time in years, they had answers. But there was still a long road ahead. "All right, everyone," Sarah said as she stepped into the room, her voice cutting through the silence. "We've got Turner. We've got evidence. It's time to bring him in for questioning." The room buzzed with nervous energy. Sarah's lead investigator, Detective Mark Bennett, stood up from his chair and gave her a nod of agreement. "Do we have enough to charge him?" Mark asked, his face etched with concern. He knew that Turner had been a ghost in Pinewood for decades. To suddenly pull him in, after all this time, was a risky move. "We don't know yet," Sarah said, her voice firm. "But we have enough to get him to talk. We know he was obsessed with Ellie, and we know that he's involved. What we don't know is where she is or what happened to her. That's what we need to find out." The team was ready. They had a plan. The only thing left was to confront Turner and hope that the cracks in his carefully constructed life would finally begin to show. As they prepared to make the arrest, Sarah's mind was consumed with the same thought that had been haunting her since they first uncovered Turner's obsession. What if he wasn't the only one? What if there were more victims? More people buried in the shadows of Pinewood, victims whose stories had never been told? What if Ellie's case wasn't the only one that had gone unnoticed for so long? She couldn't afford to let her mind wander down that path. Not now. Not when they were so close to the truth. The case was about to take a new turn, and she had to be prepared for whatever was waiting on the other side. An hour later, they arrived at Turner's farmhouse. The scene was eerily quiet, just like it had been the day they found the box in the backyard. But this time, Sarah wasn't here to investigate. She was here to confront the man who had been at the center of the town's darkest mystery for nearly 3 decades. Turner was sitting in his living room when the team arrived, his face as expressionless as it had been the day they first discovered his connection to the case. His eyes were empty, cold, as though he had already resigned himself to whatever was coming next. "Mr. Turner," Sarah said, her voice low but authoritative. "We need to talk." Turner didn't react at first. He just sat there, staring at the ground, his hands folded in his lap. He didn't even acknowledge her presence. "You're under arrest for the disappearance of Ellie Thompson," Sarah continued. "We have evidence that links you to her case. You don't have to say anything, but anything you do say can be used against you." Finally, Turner looked up, his face betraying nothing. No shock, no surprise, just a cold, empty stare. "I didn't do anything," Turner muttered, his voice hoarse, almost robotic. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah's stomach twisted with frustration. She had expected him to deny everything, but the complete lack of emotion in his voice unsettled her. There was no fight in him, no remorse, just a hollow indifference. This wasn't the first time she had seen this kind of behavior, but it still unsettled her. Turner was a man who had lived in his own world for far too long. "We know about your obsession with Ellie," Sarah pressed. "We found the bracelet. We found the photographs. We found the blood. We know you were obsessed with her. You took her, didn't you?" Turner's lips tightened, but he didn't respond. His eyes darted to the window, as though seeking some form of escape. Sarah could see the cracks starting to form, but he was holding back, unwilling to give anything away. Sarah wasn't about to let him off the hook. She needed answers. They all did. "Where is she, Turner?" she asked, her voice growing colder, sharper. "Where did you bury her?" For a moment, Turner's expression flickered. He glanced at the door, as though contemplating making a run for it. But he didn't move. His shoulders sagged, and finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he murmured. "I just wanted to keep her. She was everything. I didn't know what else to do." The words hung in the air, chilling the room. But before Sarah could press him further, Turner suddenly went silent again, his face returning to its unheardable mask. It was clear that the truth was just out of reach. But the cracks were starting to show. Sarah wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not when they were this close. "We'll find her, Turner," she said, her voice steady. "And when we do, you'll answer for everything." The room fell silent, the weight of Turner's words hanging heavy in the air. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The interrogation room was quiet, save for the soft clicking of the clock on the wall. The air was thick with tension, a quiet before the storm. Sarah Jacobs sat across from Thomas Turner, her eyes locked on his face, searching for any hint of guilt, any sign that the truth was finally about to come out. Turner had been arrested hours ago, his house ransacked, and yet he remained eerily calm, as if none of this, none of the evidence, none of the years of investigation had fazed him in the least. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. The faint sound of her pen tapping against the table was the only noise breaking the silence between them. Turner's eyes were vacant, his expression blank, as though he were in a world far removed from the questions Sarah was asking. "You've been sitting here for over 2 hours, Thomas," Sarah said, her voice low and controlled, a subtle undercurrent of frustration seeping through. "We have the evidence. We found Ellie's bracelet. We found your fingerprints on her photograph. You've been obsessing over her for years. All you need to do is tell us what happened. It's time to stop hiding." But Turner didn't move. His hands, clasped tightly on the table in front of him, didn't twitch, didn't flinch. He was like a stone, immovable, unreadable. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said flatly. His voice was so devoid of emotion it made Sarah's skin crawl. I just wanted to protect her. She was special. She was perfect." Sarah pressed her lips together in frustration. She had heard enough of this. It was always the same. Denials, deflections, and twisted justifications. Turner had been obsessed with Ellie, obsessed with the idea of possessing her. And yet here he was, acting as though he were the victim in all of this. "You didn't protect her, Thomas," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "You took her. You kept her from her family, from the people who loved her. You've been hiding the truth for years. You need to face what you did." Turner's eyes flickered for the first time, a brief flicker of something. Guilt, shame, or maybe fear, before it was quickly masked by the same cold indifference. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I just couldn't stop myself. She was everything to me. She was mine." The words hung in the air, the weight of them sinking into the room like a stone dropped into a lake. Sarah's stomach churned, her hands tightening into fists on the table. She had suspected for days that Turner's obsession had gone too far, but hearing him say it so plainly, the rawness of his confession, it made her blood run cold. "Thomas," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "Where is Ellie? What did you do to her?" There was a long pause. Turner didn't look at her, didn't meet her gaze. He stared at the floor, his lips trembling slightly, his eyes distant, as though he were lost in the fog of his own mind. Sarah waited, watching him closely, not letting her gaze waver for a second. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "I just wanted her to stay with me. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to be alone anymore." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. There it was, the truth, wrapped in the twisted mind of a man who had let his obsession fester and grow unchecked. Turner's need for control, for possession, had driven him to commit an unspeakable act. But there was still something missing, one vital piece of information. Where was Ellie? Sarah leaned in closer, her voice calm but forceful. "Tell me, Thomas. Tell me where Ellie is. You've kept this secret for far too long. It's time to end it. You owe it to her family. You owe it to yourself." Turner's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. His breath quickened, his eyes darting around the room as though searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to run now. Sarah had him. She knew it. He knew it. I never meant to kill her," Turner whispered, his voice breaking. I wanted to keep her. I thought if I just kept her in the basement, kept her safe, no one would take her from me. I didn't mean for her to die. It was an accident. The words sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Ellie had been alive. For how long? How long had she been trapped in that dark, cold place? How much time had passed before her life was snuffed out by Turner's twisted need for control? And how long had Turner kept this secret, hiding the truth behind a facade of normalcy? "Where is she, Thomas?" Sarah repeated, her voice steady, but full of the raw urgency that was coursing through her veins. "Tell me where she is." There was a long silence. For a moment, it felt as though the air itself had frozen in time. Turner's face contorted with pain, his mouth opening and closing, as though he were fighting with himself. "I didn't want to kill her," he repeated, the words tumbling out of him in a desperate stream. "But she tried to leave. She wanted to leave. She didn't understand. I had to stop her. I had to keep her with me." The room felt suffocating. The walls closed in around Sarah as she struggled to keep her composure. The brutality of Turner's actions, the coldness with which he described his twisted hold on Ellie, was almost too much to bear. "Where is she, Thomas?" Sarah demanded again, her patience running thin. "You need to tell me now. You're running out of time." For a moment, it seemed as though Turner might say nothing more, that he would retreat into the silence he had carried for so long. But then, with a trembling hand, he stood up from the table. His face was pale, his eyes haunted, and his body seemed to sag under the weight of the years of guilt and shame. "She's buried," he whispered, barely audible. "In the woods, behind the house. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to keep her with me." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt her breath catch in her throat, the room spinning around her as the magnitude of what Turner had just confessed settled into her bones. Ellie was out there. After all these years, after all the unanswered questions, Ellie's body was waiting to be found. "Get the team!" Sarah snapped, her voice shaking. "We're going to the woods." The next few hours were a blur of activity as Sarah and her team mobilized, making their way to Turner's property once again. The sky had darkened, and the rain had stopped, leaving behind a thick, oppressive mist that hung low in the air. The woods behind Turner's house were silent, eerily still, as though holding their breath, waiting for the truth to be unearthed. The team spread out, each member searching a different part of the woods, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The ground was soft from the rain, and Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the area, her mind racing with the possibilities of what they might find. Would they finally bring Ellie home? Would they finally give her family the answers they had been waiting for? It wasn't long before they found it. A small, nondescript area just off the beaten path, where the ground had been recently disturbed. It was shallow at first, but as the team dug deeper, the truth began to emerge. A body. Ellie's body. Sarah's heart dropped into her stomach as she stared at the remains, her breath catching in her throat. This was it. After all these years, after all the pain, the mystery had been solved. Ellie Thompson had finally been found. But the weight of it all, what she had endured, the life that had been stolen from her, was too much to bear. As the team continued to recover the remains, Sarah's mind raced. Turner had finally confessed, but it didn't change the fact that a young girl had lost her life in the most unimaginable way. And as she looked at Ellie's body, lying there in the earth, Sarah knew one thing for certain. This case wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about honoring the memory of a life cut short, a life that had been taken too soon. The sky was darker than usual as Sarah Jacobs stood at the edge of the woods, watching her team work. It was late, and the rain had started again, a heavy, drenching downpour that felt as though the sky itself was mourning the revelation they had just uncovered. The chill of the evening seeped into her bones, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was the weight of the discovery, the realization that Ellie Thompson's life had ended here, in the very place where the rain was now washing away any trace of the past. As the team continued to work, carefully excavating Ellie's remains from the shallow grave behind Thomas Turner's house, Sarah felt the full scope of what they had just uncovered settle into her chest. Ellie's body had been hidden for nearly 3 decades. 30 years of grief, of unanswered questions, of a community haunted by a missing girl who had never been found. Now, at long last, they had answers. But the questions that remained were far darker than Sarah could have imagined. Who was Ellie to Turner, really? And why had he chosen her, out of all the others, to imprison in his twisted, obsessive world? Sarah's mind kept returning to that single word he had spoken in the interrogation room. Mine. Turner had used it with such chilling finality when describing Ellie. She was mine. It was as though he had seen her not as a person, but as a possession to be kept locked away, a thing to be controlled. And it was that very obsession that had driven him to take her life, to end her story before it had truly begun. Sarah was interrupted from her thoughts as one of her team members, Detective Mark Bennett, approached her, his face grim under the rain. "Sarah," Mark said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "You need to see this." Without hesitation, Sarah followed him through the mud, her boots sinking slightly with every step as they made their way to the area where the body had been uncovered. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and the faint glow of the flashlights cast long shadows across the ground. The remains were laid out on a tarp, a somber tableau in the middle of the woods. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she looked down at Ellie's body, or what was left of it. The body had clearly been buried hastily, and the decomposition had taken its toll. But there was still enough left to identify the remains. Ellie Thompson, who had disappeared on that fateful night all those years ago. Her long, dark hair was tangled and matted, her clothes torn and disheveled. It was impossible to look at her without feeling the weight of what had been taken from her, what had been stolen from her family. But there was something else that caught Sarah's attention. Something that shouldn't have been there, something that made her blood run cold. Beneath the clothes, hidden from view, was a dark mark on Ellie's neck. It was unmistakable, an abrasion, a bruise, a sign that Ellie had been strangled. Sarah's stomach twisted, a sickening feeling washing over her as she knelt down to examine it more closely. "Mark," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Take a look at this." Mark crouched beside her, his expression turning from one of professional detachment to one of grim realization as he saw the bruise on Ellie's neck. It was clear that Ellie had not died quickly or peacefully. She had fought. She had struggled for her life. The realization was crushing, and the weight of it settled on Sarah's chest like an anchor, dragging her down. "How long do you think she's been dead?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah's mind raced. Ellie had disappeared in 1993. That meant she had been dead for nearly 3 decades, a thought that was almost impossible to process. But there was something more to it than just the passage of time. There was the fact that Ellie had been buried here, behind Turner's house, in a place that no one had thought to look for all these years. "We'll need to wait for the coroner's report," Sarah said quietly, her mind already shifting gears. "But this bruise, it doesn't look like an accident. Turner didn't just take her. He killed her. He murdered her." It was a sickening thought, one that made Sarah's stomach churn. Turner had been living in the town for years, had been walking among them, hiding in plain sight. And yet, the people of Pinewood had never suspected that a monster was living just beyond their backyard. "Let's get her back to the lab," Sarah said, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. "We'll run the tests. We'll get the confirmation we need." As they carefully wrapped Ellie's remains in the tarp, Sarah felt a sense of finality begin to settle over her. They had found Ellie. The truth was finally coming to light, but it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. Ellie had been robbed of her future, her potential, her life. And for what? A man's twisted obsession, a need to control, to possess. It was a fate no one should have to face, especially a young girl just beginning to step into the world. The drive back to the station was quiet, save for the occasional murmur of the radio and the sound of the rain against the car. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her mind still racing with the implications of everything they had uncovered. She glanced at the evidence bag with Ellie's bracelet sitting next to her, a reminder of everything the girl had lost, of everything they had been fighting to bring to light. When they arrived back at the station, the team was already hard at work processing the new information. The lab had begun analyzing the blood traces on the bracelet, and the forensic team had begun running tests on the partial print they had lifted from one of the photographs Turner had kept. There was a palpable sense of urgency in the air, a sense that they were finally approaching the end of a long and painful journey. But even as the team worked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than they had uncovered so far. Turner's confession, such as it was, had provided some answers, but it hadn't given them everything they needed. There were still too many questions. How had Turner managed to keep Ellie alive for as long as he did? Had anyone else been involved? And how could he have hidden her for so long, in plain sight of the town that had never suspected him? It was the last question that lingered in Sarah's mind as she sat at her desk, reviewing the case files once again. Turner had been living in the town for years, but no one had ever suspected him. The man had kept to himself, had always been a little off, but that was about it. No one knew that he was capable of such violence, of such twisted obsession. But now, as the pieces fell into place, it was clear that Turner had been hiding something far darker than anyone had ever imagined. The night Ellie had disappeared had been the beginning of a long nightmare for her family, a nightmare that had stretched on for nearly 30 years. But now, that nightmare was finally coming to an end. Sarah could feel it in her bones. They had the evidence. They had Turner's confession, however incomplete it was, and now it was time to finish what they had started. Sarah stood up, her mind focused, her determination hardening. It wasn't over yet. The truth had been found, but the case was far from finished. They still had to bring Turner to justice, and they still had to give Ellie's family the closure they deserved. And as Sarah walked out of the office, her footsteps echoing through the quiet hallway, she knew that this was only the beginning. The fight was far from over. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, interviews, and tense moments in the interrogation room. Sarah Jacobs, along with her team, worked tirelessly to put together the pieces of the puzzle that had been scattered across Pinewood for nearly 3 decades. The discovery of Ellie's body had answered some questions, but there were still so many unanswered ones. Turner's confession had been chilling, but it lacked details, critical details. Why had he chosen Ellie? What had led him to murder her? And who else, if anyone, had been involved? The question that loomed largest, though, was one Sarah couldn't escape. How had Turner managed to hide Ellie's body for so long? The woods behind his house had been searched several times over the years by both the police and the townspeople. Yet no one had ever thought to look so close, to search right beneath their noses. Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to Turner's story, something darker lurking in the shadows. It wasn't long before the forensic team had completed their analysis of the evidence collected from Turner's property. The blood on the bracelet had been Ellie's, confirming what they already suspected. And the partial print from the photograph? It matched Turner's, without a doubt. He had been the one to take the photo, the one to watch her, the one to stalk her in secret. But the forensic report also revealed something else that made Sarah's blood run cold. Ellie's time of death. According to the coroner's report, Ellie had been alive for a significant amount of time after she was taken. She hadn't died immediately, as Sarah had feared. Instead, she had been kept alive for weeks, maybe even longer, before her life had been snuffed out by the very man who claimed to love her. The realization hit Sarah hard. Ellie had endured suffering before she died, and that suffering had been at the hands of the very person who was supposed to protect her. As she read the report, Sarah's mind kept returning to one unsettling thought. Why hadn't Turner killed Ellie outright? Why had he kept her alive and for so long? Was it about control? Possession? Or was there something more twisted at play here? The next day, Sarah decided to pay Turner another visit. She needed answers. She needed him to speak more than he had in the first round of questioning. The faint confession he had given, barely above a whisper, had left her with more questions than answers. She wasn't leaving this time until she had a clearer picture of the monster they were dealing with. The interrogation room was stark and cold, the walls closing in around Turner as Sarah took her seat across from him. He had been brought in earlier that morning, and now, here he was again, sitting in front of her, his face as blank and unreadable as ever. His eyes were sunken, and his skin had taken on a sickly pallor. He was a man on the verge of breaking, but Sarah knew better than to expect him to fold easily. He had been hiding his true self for years, but now the truth was catching up with him. "Thomas," Sarah began, her voice calm but firm. "I need you to tell me everything. All of it. Why, Ellie? Why did you do this? Why did you keep her alive? Why didn't you just let her go?" Turner's hands twitched at his sides, but he didn't respond right away. His lips pressed together, as though weighing his words carefully. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. "I didn't want to hurt her," he said finally, his voice so low Sarah almost had to strain to hear it. "I just wanted her to be mine. She didn't understand. She was perfect. I couldn't let anyone take her from me." The words hung in the air, disturbing in their simplicity. Perfect. It was the word he used to justify everything, to explain the inexplicable. But Sarah wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. "You didn't just take her, Thomas," Sarah pressed, her tone sharp. "You tortured her. You kept her locked away for weeks, and then you killed her. You took everything from her. Her life, her future. You're not a man who loved her. You're a monster who wanted to own her." Turner's eyes flickered, but he didn't look away. His lips parted slightly, as though trying to find the right words. I didn't know what else to do," he murmured, the desperation in his voice barely masked. "I was alone. I couldn't stand the thought of her being with anyone else. She didn't deserve to leave me. She was mine. She was mine." Sarah's stomach churned at the way he said those words, as though Ellie had been nothing more than an object to him. A possession. It was a chilling glimpse into the darkness of his mind. "Did you think she wouldn't fight you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Did you think she wouldn't try to escape? Try to fight for her life? She was just a girl, Thomas. She didn't belong to you." Turner looked away for a moment, his expression hardening, and then he spoke again, this time with an unsettling sense of finality in his voice. "She didn't understand. She thought she could leave. She thought she could get away from me. But I made sure that didn't happen. I made sure she stayed." Sarah's heart raced as she processed his words. Turner had been keeping Ellie alive, probably in some hidden room, possibly even in his basement. It was impossible to fathom the suffering she had endured, the fear she must have felt. But as Turner spoke, something shifted in Sarah's mind. He wasn't just a man who had taken a girl's life. He was someone who had meticulously planned his crime, who had kept his victim locked away for his own selfish desires. Sarah took a deep breath and tried again, softer this time. "Tell me, Thomas, where did you keep her? Where did you keep her after you took her?" For the first time since the interrogation began, Turner's mask seemed to slip. His face twitched, a subtle but significant movement. His eyes flickered toward the window, and his body seemed to tense, as though preparing to run. But he didn't. "I couldn't let her go," he whispered, almost to himself. "I just couldn't. I kept her in the basement. She was everything. I couldn't let anyone else take her away from me. The words were almost too much to bear. Ellie, the girl whose laughter had once echoed through Pinewood, had been kept in Turner's basement for weeks, hidden away from the world, from her family, from anyone who could have saved her. And when she tried to escape, when she fought to be free, Turner had silenced her forever. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief moment, forcing herself to focus. She had to keep her composure, had to remain objective. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. They were finally getting the answers they needed. "Tell me where you buried her, Thomas," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Tell me, and this nightmare will be over." For a long moment, Turner said nothing. He seemed lost in his thoughts, his eyes unfocused, as though drifting into a memory of the past. Finally, he spoke, his voice small, almost apologetic. "She's in the woods behind the house," he said softly. "I buried her where no one would look. I thought I could keep her with me forever, but she's gone now, and I'm sorry." Sarah's heart sank as she heard his words. She had suspected it, but hearing it from him, hearing the coldness with which he spoke of Ellie's death, was almost too much to process. He had taken everything from her family, from the town, from the world, and now he was sitting here, admitting to the crime with no remorse, no hint of guilt. "You will never be sorry enough for what you've done," Sarah said quietly, her voice full of fury and disbelief. "But we'll find her, Thomas, and we'll make sure you never hurt anyone again." As the team prepared to go to the woods and recover Ellie's remains, Sarah couldn't shake the image of Turner's cold, empty eyes. He was guilty, beyond a shadow of a doubt. But there was something else in his gaze, something that still unsettled her. He wasn't just a man who had killed a young girl. He was a man who had tortured her, who had tried to keep her trapped in his twisted world for as long as he could. And now, Sarah would make sure he paid for every moment of Ellie's suffering. But even as she prepared to bring Turner to justice, a question lingered in her mind. How many more people like him were hiding in the shadows, waiting to take someone else's life? The woods were eerily quiet as Sarah Jacobs and her team made their way through the dense thicket, the sound of their boots crunching through the underbrush, the only thing breaking the stillness. The rain had finally stopped, but the ground was still soaked, the air heavy with moisture. It felt as though the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final pieces of the puzzle to fall into place. Turner had confessed to burying Ellie in the woods behind his house, and now it was time to bring her home. As Sarah walked ahead, her thoughts were a blur. She had been a detective for over a decade, and yet the weight of this case, the brutality of what Turner had done to Ellie, the years of torment, the years of unanswered questions, was almost too much to bear. She had expected to feel relief when they finally uncovered the truth, but all she felt was a deep, hollow emptiness. The town had been living in a lie for so long, and now, as they moved closer to the truth, there was nothing to do but face the horror of it all. Sarah glanced at Mark Bennett, who was walking beside her, his face set in a grim expression. They had all been working non-stop for the last few days, processing the evidence, questioning Turner, and piecing together the details of the crime. But no matter how much they uncovered, it didn't change the fact that a young girl had lost her life, her future stolen away by a man who had been living among them for years, hiding in plain sight. "Do you think he knew this was going to happen?" Mark asked, breaking the silence between them. His voice was quiet, as if he too was struggling with the weight of the case. Sarah shook her head, her gaze fixed ahead as they walked. "I don't know. I don't know if he planned it or if it just happened. But I do know one thing. He didn't just kill Ellie. He made her suffer. He trapped her, kept her, and when she fought back, he ended her life. He thought he could control her, that he could make her his forever. But in the end, he failed, and now we're going to find her." As they moved deeper into the woods, Sarah's mind replayed the interrogation with Turner. His confession had been chilling, But what unsettled her more was the way he spoke about Ellie. She was perfect. She was his. He had spoken of her like a possession, an object to be controlled, to be kept under his control. It wasn't just about murder. It was about domination, about taking someone's life and bending it to his will. Turner hadn't just killed Ellie. He had taken her existence and twisted it into something unrecognizable, something that could never be fixed. The team's flashlights cut through the darkness of the woods, illuminating the way as they continued their search. It wasn't long before they reached a small clearing at the base of a cluster of trees. The ground here had been disturbed, and as Sarah stepped forward, she could feel the sickening reality of what they were about to uncover. They had found it. This was where Ellie had been buried. "Here!" one of the officers called out, his voice tight with emotion. "We've got something!" Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she hurried over to the area where the officer stood. He was crouched next to a small patch of freshly turned earth, his hand hovering above the ground as though uncertain of what he would find. But Sarah didn't need to be told. She already knew. With the team's help, they began to dig. The earth came away easily, the soil soft and damp from the rain. The deeper they went, the more Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. They were getting closer. The sense of finality was suffocating. The realization that this was it, the moment when Ellie's fate would be revealed in full. And then, as they dug a little deeper, something solid gave way. The team stopped immediately, their breath held in unison. Slowly, carefully, they cleared the remaining dirt to reveal what lay beneath. A black plastic bag, the edges torn and frayed, barely clinging to the shape inside. Sarah's stomach turned as she reached for the bag, her hands trembling. She couldn't afford to let the emotion take over, not now, not when they were so close. With a quick motion, she tore the bag open, revealing Ellie's body, cold and lifeless. The sight hit Sarah like a physical blow, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Ellie Thompson, the girl whose disappearance had haunted Pinewood for so many years, was finally found. But the damage had already been done. The team quickly documented the scene, taking photographs and notes as Sarah stood by, her mind numb. Ellie's body was a testament to the brutality that had been inflicted upon her. Her clothes were torn, her hair matted, and there, on her neck, was the mark. The bruise, the sign of Turner's hands around her throat. It was confirmation, a final piece of the puzzle. Turner had murdered Ellie. He had taken her life in the most violent way imaginable. As they carefully moved Ellie's body, Sarah couldn't help but think of her family, her mother, her father. They had lived through years of uncertainty, never knowing what had happened to their daughter. And now, after all this time, they finally had the answers they had been waiting for. But there would be no joy in this moment. There could be no peace, not after everything that had happened. "Get her back to the lab," Sarah said, her voice hoarse with emotion. "We need to get her identified, and we need to get Turner charged." As the team packed up the remains and prepared to leave the woods, Sarah stayed behind for a moment, standing alone in the clearing. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, suffocating. Ellie was gone. The girl who had vanished all those years ago, the girl whose face had been on every missing poster in town, was finally home. But at what cost? Sarah's mind raced as she stood there, alone in the woods. She had always believed that bringing justice to the victims was what kept her going. But this case had shaken her to her core. There were so many things they still didn't know, so many things Turner had yet to admit. He had been silent throughout the entire investigation, offering nothing more than half-hearted confessions and cryptic statements. There were still so many layers to this case, so many unanswered questions that left Sarah wondering if they had really uncovered everything. As the officers began to clear the area, Sarah turned away, her gaze lingering on the small patch of disturbed earth one last time. The woods were quiet now, almost too quiet. The only sound was the soft rustling of the leaves in the breeze. Ellie was gone. But the truth had finally been unearthed. And Turner, no matter how much he tried to deny it, was going to face the consequences of his actions. She couldn't let herself linger in the past, in the pain of what had happened. She couldn't afford to, not when there was so much left to do. Sarah got into the car, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. There were arrests to be made. There were charges to be filed. And most importantly, there was a family who needed closure. Ellie's family had waited long enough. And now, Sarah was going to make sure they finally got the justice they deserved. The case wasn't over yet, but they had come a long way. Turner's reign of terror was finally coming to an end. And as Sarah drove back to the station, she knew one thing for certain. Ellie's story was finally being told. The town of Pinewood would never be the same, but they would never forget the girl who had been taken from them. Ellie Thompson would always be remembered, and for Sarah, that was enough. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. People from all over Pinewood had come to witness the final chapter in the haunting mystery that had gripped their town for nearly 3 decades. The case of Ellie Thompson, the girl who had vanished without a trace in 1993, was about to come to a close. The truth had finally come to light, but the town's grief was far from over. Ellie's body had been recovered, and her killer, Thomas Turner, was about to stand trial for the most horrific crime Pinewood had ever witnessed. Sarah Jacobs sat in the front row of the courtroom, her eyes fixed on Turner, who sat at the defense table with his lawyer. He was still the same, stoic, emotionless, his face as blank as it had been during their interrogations. He showed no remorse, no guilt. He was just a man who had been caught in the act, trying to make his way through the consequences of a crime that no one could truly comprehend. The prosecuting attorney, a seasoned lawyer named Rachel Carter, stood before the judge, presenting the case with unwavering confidence. She had worked tirelessly to bring justice to Ellie's family, to the town, and to everyone who had spent years in the shadow of this unsolved mystery. She had spent countless hours reviewing the evidence, speaking with the witnesses, and building a case that would finally ensure Turner paid for what he had done. Turner's defense attorney, a quiet man named Edward Jenkins, sat across from Rachel, his posture slightly hunched, as though he knew the odds were stacked against him. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. Turner had confessed. His fingerprints had been found on Ellie's photographs. The bracelet had been recovered, and the blood on the bracelet had been Ellie's. The evidence was damning. But Jenkins was doing what any defense lawyer would do, fighting for his client, no matter how small the chance of victory. As the trial unfolded, the details of the case, which had remained buried for so long, began to pour out into the open. The prosecutors laid out the timeline, from the moment Ellie disappeared to the discovery of her body in Turner's backyard. They detailed Turner's obsession with Ellie, his twisted need to control her, and his cold, calculated actions that led to her murder. The evidence, piece by piece, painted a chilling picture of a man who had kept a young girl trapped for weeks, possibly longer, before taking her life in a brutal act of violence. Ellie's family, who had sat through years of agony, were finally able to speak. Her mother, Helen, gave a heartbreaking testimony about the pain she had endured since her daughter vanished. She spoke of the hope she had clung to, even when there was no hope left, of the years of searching, of wondering, of waiting for a phone call, a piece of news, a shred of hope. And now, she stood in the courtroom, telling the world how her daughter's life had been stolen from her in the most unimaginable way. Helen's voice cracked as she spoke, and the courtroom fell silent in respect. She described the moment she had first heard about Ellie's body being discovered, how she had hoped for a miracle, for something, anything, that would prove that her daughter was still alive. But as soon as she saw the photo of Ellie's remains, she knew. The agony in her eyes was unmistakable, and it left a deep, lasting impact on everyone in the room. For Sarah, hearing Helen speak was like a knife to the heart. She had been so focused on solving the case, on finding the answers, that she had almost forgotten the human toll of it all. But now, sitting there, hearing the pain in Helen's voice, Sarah realized just how much this case had destroyed, and how much more would be lost before it was finally over. After Helen's testimony, it was time for Turner to take the stand. His defense lawyer had insisted on it, despite the overwhelming evidence. Turner had remained silent throughout the trial, but now, as he sat in front of the judge, the truth would be laid bare. He was about to give the final twisted explanation for why he had done what he did. "Thomas Turner, do you swear to tell the truth?" the judge asked. Turner didn't answer immediately. He stared straight ahead, his eyes unfocused, as though he were somewhere else entirely. Finally, he nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. I didn't mean to kill her," Turner said, his voice so low that it barely carried to the back of the courtroom. "I never meant to hurt her. I just couldn't help myself. She was perfect. She was everything to me. I didn't know how to live without her. I thought if I kept her, if I just kept her with me, everything would be okay." His words, although barely audible, echoed through the courtroom. Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. He wasn't even truly apologizing. He wasn't acknowledging the depth of the horror he had inflicted. He was speaking as though he had lost something, a possession, rather than acknowledging the brutal murder of an innocent young girl. "I didn't know what else to do," Turner continued, his voice trembling now. "She was mine. She belonged to me. I thought, if I could just keep her safe, everything would be okay. But I didn't mean for it to go that far. I just wanted her to stay with me. She didn't deserve to leave me." Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Turner's words were so detached, so cold, as though he truly believed that Ellie's life was his to take, his to control. He didn't see her as a person. He saw her as an object, something to possess. The defense lawyer stood up, motioning for Turner to step down from the witness stand. The courtroom was silent as the judge called for a short recess, and everyone began to process what had just been said. Sarah, however, couldn't shake the thought that kept creeping into her mind. How could someone be so completely consumed by their own delusions, their own obsessions, that they would go this far? The recess felt like an eternity as Sarah sat there, her thoughts a whirlwind. Turner had confessed in his own twisted way, but it didn't feel like enough. It never felt like enough. Ellie was gone. Her family had been torn apart. And no matter how many words Turner spoke, nothing would bring her back. When the trial resumed, the prosecution made its closing argument. Rachel Carter, the prosecutor, spoke with the same confidence she had shown throughout the trial. She was precise, methodical, and unyielding. She painted a picture of Turner as a man so consumed by his need for control that he had snuffed out the life of a young girl to feed his obsession. "This wasn't a crime of passion," Rachel said, her voice carrying the weight of every piece of evidence they had uncovered. "This was a calculated, deliberate act of violence, driven by nothing more than the twisted desire to possess another human being. Ellie Thompson was more than just a victim. She was a person, a daughter, a friend, and she deserves justice." The words hung in the air as the jury deliberated. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the families, the community, and even Sarah waited for the final verdict. Hours later, the jury returned with their decision. The courtroom fell silent as the foreperson stood up to read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Thomas Turner, guilty of the murder of Ellie Thompson." The words reverberated through Sarah's body like a shockwave. It was done. After all the years of searching, of waiting, of wondering what had happened to Ellie, the case was finally closed. But even as she heard the verdict, a strange emptiness settled over her. The justice they had fought for had been served, but it didn't bring back the life that had been lost. As the judge banged his gavel, sentencing Turner to life in prison, Sarah stood up and walked out of the courtroom. There were no cheers, no celebrations, just the heavy weight of a story that had ended far too late. Ellie Thompson had finally received justice. But for Sarah, the fight wasn't over. There would always be another case, another story, another victim. The work never stopped. But as she stepped out into the cold, rainy night, Trara couldn't help but think of Ellie, of the life she had lost, of the future that was stolen from her. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to grieve. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, their cameras flashing as they shouted questions at anyone leaving the building. The final verdict was out, and Pinewood was buzzing with the shocking truth that had finally been revealed. But as Sarah Jacobs walked away from the courthouse, she wasn't thinking about the press or the crowds. She wasn't thinking about the case that had come to an end, or the justice that had been served. She was thinking about Ellie. Ellie Thompson had been found. She had been given a name, a face, and a proper goodbye, even though it had come far too late. Ellie's family had been through hell, but in the end, they had the answers they had waited so long for. But for Sarah, the weight of the case had left her exhausted. The trial was over. Turner had been convicted, and the town of Pinewood would now begin the long process of healing from the wounds his actions had caused. But the healing didn't come easily. Not for Sarah, and certainly not for Ellie's family. The grief was still fresh, raw, and real. Sarah pulled her coat tighter around herself as the autumn wind whipped through the streets. It was a cold day, the kind of day that made you want to curl up by a fire, to forget about the world for a while. But there was no escaping the weight of what had happened. There never would be. The investigation was over. The case was closed. But Sarah still couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that there was more to this story than they had uncovered. Turner had confessed, but not in a way that provided real closure. His words had been filled with excuses, with twisted justifications for his actions. He had never truly owned up to the depth of his crime. He had never truly admitted that Ellie had been a person to him, not an object to be possessed. And no matter how many times he had been sentenced to life in prison, the psychological damage he had inflicted on this town, on Ellie's family, was irreparable. As she turned the corner, Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Mark Bennett, her lead investigator. "Come to the station. We've got something." It was the kind of message that sent a ripple of unease through her. What could this be? The case was closed. Turner was in custody. There shouldn't have been anything more to find. But Sarah knew better. There was always more. There was always something else hiding beneath the surface. She didn't waste time. Sarah walked quickly to her car, her mind racing. As soon as she got to the station, she found Mark waiting for her in the briefing room, his face tense. The rest of the team was gathered around the table, each of them eyeing her as she walked in. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The case is closed, right?" Mark looked at her with a mixture of hesitation and concern. "We thought it was, but there's something you need to see." He motioned for her to sit. As Sarah took her place at the table, Mark slid a folder across to her. She opened it, her eyes scanning the documents inside. At first, it seemed like a routine report, just the usual paperwork, summaries of Turner's background, and evidence that had been presented during the trial. But then she found something that made her freeze. There, tucked away in the back of the folder, was a new set of photographs. These weren't the ones they had already seen. Pictures of Ellie, of Turner's obsession, of the photographs Turner had kept. No, these were different. These were photos taken after Turner's arrest. They were of the house, Turner's house, the one that had been searched multiple times before. The photos were blurry, but they still showed enough to make Sarah's heart race. There were images of the attic, the basement, and a room at the back of the house, that they hadn't examined during the original search. There were also photos of strange items, boxes, shelves filled with books, and strange journals. But there was one photo that stood out above all the others. A small, locked box, placed in a hidden corner of the basement, tucked behind a pile of old furniture. It had been overlooked before. No one had thought to open it. Sarah's gut twisted as she looked at the photo. She knew immediately that this was no ordinary box. It was something Turner had hidden, something he didn't want anyone to find. "Mark, what is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mark's face was pale. "We don't know. We found it yesterday, after Turner was already in custody. The team's been going through everything again, double-checking what we missed before. But this is new. Did you open it?" Sarah's voice was sharp now, filled with the urgency of 100 unsaid questions. "We did. But there's something inside that I don't think we were prepared for," Mark said, his eyes filled with something Sarah had never seen before. Fear. "It's not just more evidence of Turner's obsession with Ellie. It's something else." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What else could be in there?" Mark took a deep breath and leaned forward. "I need you to see it for yourself." Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the folder and followed Mark to the back room, her mind racing. She couldn't believe it. After everything they had uncovered, after everything they had worked through, how could there possibly be something else? They reached the room, and Mark opened the door, revealing a small, dimly lit space. Inside, an officer was waiting with the box they had found hidden in Turner's basement. It was small, old, with a brass lock on the front. There was something almost personal about it, as if it had been Turner's most prized possession. "Here," Mark said, his voice tight. "This is it." Sarah stared at the box for a long moment. It felt as though the world had stopped moving. The weight of what was happening, what they were about to uncover, hung in the air like a storm cloud. She walked slowly toward the box, her hand reaching out to open it. The lock came off easily, and Sarah lifted the lid. Inside, she found stacks of letters. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink fading. But what made her breath catch in her throat were the names written on the front of each letter. They weren't just from Ellie. They were from other girls who had been missing over the years, girls who had vanished from towns near Pinewood, from places Sarah had never thought to connect to this case. The letters were chilling. They detailed the same things over and over: Turner's obsession, his constant surveillance of these girls, his twisted need to possess them. These letters were proof that Ellie had not been his first victim. There were others who had come before her, and likely others who had come after. Sarah's hands shook as she flipped through the letters, each one a fragment of Turner's madness. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Turner had been on a decades-long spree of abductions, and Ellie had just been one in a long line of girls he had kept hidden away, controlled, and then discarded when they fought back. The depth of Turner's crimes was far greater than they had ever imagined. He hadn't just taken Ellie, he had taken others before her, and there was no telling how many others had fallen prey to his obsession over the years. Mark stood beside her, watching her reaction. "We need to get this information to the FBI. We need to connect the dots and see if these girls have been reported missing in other states." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, taking in everything she had just learned. The case that had been haunting her for months, the case that had consumed her life, was far more complex than she had ever imagined. Turner wasn't just a murderer. He was a predator, a serial abductor who had been hiding in plain sight for decades. As the officers began cataloguing the letters, Sarah knew that the case was far from over. Turner had been caught, but there were others out there, others who might still be missing, others who might still be in danger. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a fire of determination ignite within her. This wasn't just about solving Ellie's case anymore. It was about stopping a monster who had been allowed to roam free for far too long. "We need to find out who they are," Sarah said, her voice filled with resolve. "We need to find the other girls before it's too late." And with that, Sarah Jacobs knew that the real fight had only just begun. The weight of the discovery settled heavily on Sarah Jacobs as she sat at her desk, staring at the files spread out before her. The letters they had found in the box were proof of something far darker